And we're live again. Bad morning to all of you out there. We have several items of housekeeping to deal with. First off, we have a Patreon now, patreon.com/badmorningnews, one word. Second off, we have a Steemit at Bad Morning News. That Steemit is also a D Live, so if you follow us over there, if you have one of those accounts, you can support us by giving us that sweet upvote cash. But essentially, if you follow us on Steemit right now, you'll follow us on D Live and DTube as well. And D Live test is on Monday. Providing that I can not be fucking homeless, because I've got the fucking money now to get an apartment. I just need to go find a shared place that's in my area. So that should be a fun thing to do over the weekend. But anyway, aside from all that, the fucking thing should be relatively automated soon, in terms of how much potential it has to grow. And I'm going to give bots in the Discord some of the duties that we've been having lately. Like, it's going to tag everyone when we're live. So that sort of thing should be relatively easy. But that, in addition to the fact that we're essentially going to be streaming to multiple platforms at once, and not using the dumbass Hangouts interface, means that a lot of the frustrations that we've been having should be able to subside. So that's good. But the bad morning is what we're trying to emphasize. So with that in mind, let's get into today's headlines. And I think we should start people off with a laugh. So, Dexter, you brought up something, I think, about dolphins.
Yeah, so I've got a little piece of investigative journalism. The Guardian, a news service that some of you might know, has done a deep dive into an old government waste project. And well, you know what? Instead of summarizing anything, let's just get into this. It's a little bit longer. I'll cut stuff out where I can for time's sake, but the headline title is "The Dolphin Who Loved Me, the NASA-funded project that went wrong." Like most children, Margaret Howe Lovett grew up with stories of talking animals. There was this book that my mother gave to me called Miss Kelly, she remembers with a twinkle in her eye. It was a story about a cat who could talk and understand humans, and it just stuck with me that maybe there is this possibility. Unlike most children, Lovett didn't leave these tales of talking animals behind her as she grew up. In her early 20s, living on the Caribbean island of St. Thomas, they took on a new significance. During Christmas 1963, her brother-in-law mentioned a secret laboratory at the east end of the island where they were working with dolphins. She decided to pay the lab a visit early the following year. I was curious, Lovett recalls. I drove out there, down a muddy hill, and at the bottom was a cliff with a big white building. Lovett was met by a tall man with tousled hair, wearing an open shirt and smoking a cigarette. His name was Gregory Bateson, a great intellectual of the 20th century and director of the lab. "Why did you come here?" he asked Lovett. "Well, I heard you had dolphins," she replied, "and I thought I'd come and see if there was anything I could do or any way I could help." Unused to unannounced visitors and impressed by her bravado, Bateson invited her to meet the animals and asked her to watch them for a while and write down what she saw. Despite her lack of scientific training, Lovett turned out to be an intuitive observer of animal behavior, and Bateson told her she could come back whenever she wanted. There were 3 dolphins, remembers Lovett: Peter, Pamela, and Sissy. Sissy was the biggest, pushy, loud. She sort of ran the show. Pamela was very shy and fearful, and Peter was a young guy. He was sexually coming of age and a bit naughty. The lab's upper floors overhung a sea pool that housed the animals. It was cleaned by the tide through openings at each end. The facility had been designed to bring humans and dolphins into closer proximity and was the brainchild of American neuroscientist Dr. John Lilly. Here, Lilly hoped to commune with the creatures, nurturing their ability to make animal-like sounds through their blowholes. Lilly had been interested in connecting with cetaceans, the scientific family name for dolphins, it would seem, since coming face to face with a beached pilot whale on the coast near his home in Massachusetts in 1949. The young medic couldn't quite believe the size of the animal's brain and began to imagine just how intelligent the creature must have been, explains Graham Burnett, professor of the history of science at Princeton and author of The Sounding of the Whale. You're talking about a time in science when everybody's thinking about a correlation between brain size and what the brain can do. And in this period, researchers were like, whoa, big brain, huh? Cool. Now let's see, we're going to skip forward a little bit. I'm skipping past the section where it goes into talking about the work of this Dr. John Lilly. That's not quite the relevant area of this. Let's see. Here we go. Now aged 97, Mary still remembers the day very clearly. I came in at the top of the operating theater and heard John talking, and the dolphin would go, what, like John. And then Alice, his assistant, would reply in a high tone of voice, and the dolphin would imitate her. I went down to where they were operating and told them that this was going on, and they were quite startled. Perhaps, John reasoned, this behavior indicated an ambition on the dolphin's part to communicate with the humans around them. If so, here were exciting new opportunities for interspecies communication. Lilly published his theory in a book in 1961 called Man and Dolphin. The idea of talking dolphins eager to tell us something captured the public's imagination, and the book became a bestseller. Let's see. Lilly's theory had special significance for another group of scientists, astronomers. I'd read his book and was very impressed, says Frank Drake, who had just completed the first experiment to detect signals from extraterrestrial civilizations using a radio telescope at Green Bank in West Virginia. It was a very exciting book because it had these new ideas about creatures as intelligent and sophisticated as us, and yet living in a far different milieu. He immediately saw parallels with Lilly's work because we both wanted to understand as much as we could about the challenges of communicating with other intelligent species. This interest helped Lilly win financial backing from NASA and other government agencies. And Lilly opened his new lab in the Caribbean in 1963 with the aim of nurturing closer relationships between man and dolphin. A few months later, in early 1964, Lovett arrived. Through her naturally empathic nature, she quickly connected with the three animals, and eager to embrace John Lilly's vision for building an interspecies communication bridge, she threw herself into his work, spending as much time as possible with the dolphins, and carrying out a program of daily lessons to encourage them to make human-like sounds. While the lab's director, Gregory Bateson, concentrated on animal-to-animal communication, Lovett was left alone to pursue Lilly's dream of teaching the dolphins to speak English. But even at the state-of-the-art facility like the Dolphin House, barriers remained. Every night we would get in our cars and pull the garage door down and drive away, remembers Lovett. And I thought, well, there's this big brain floating around all night. It amazed me that everybody kept leaving, and I just thought it was wrong. Lovett reasoned that if she could live with a dolphin around the clock, nurturing its interest in making human-like sounds, like a mother teaching a child to speak, they'd have more success. Maybe it was because I was living so close to the lab. It just seemed so simple. Why let the water get in the way, she says. So I said to John Lilly, I want to plaster everything and fill this place with water. I want to live here. She began completely waterproofing the upper floors of the lab so that she could actually flood the indoor rooms and outdoor balcony with a couple of feet of water. This would allow a dolphin to live comfortably in the building with her for 3 months. Lovett selected the young male dolphin called Peter for her live-in experiment. I chose to work with Peter because he had not had any human-like sound training and the other two had, she explains. Lovett would attempt to live in isolation with him 6 days a week, sleeping on a makeshift bed on the elevator platform in the middle of the room and doing her paperwork on a desk suspended from the ceiling and hanging down over the water. On the 7th day, Peter would return to the sea pool downstairs to spend time with the 2 female dolphins at the lab, Pamela and Sissy. Let's see. Audio recordings of Lovett's progress, meticulously archived on quarter-inch tapes at the time, captured the energy that Lovett brought to the experiment, doggedly documenting Peter's progress with her twice-daily lessons and repeatedly encouraging him to greet her with the phrase, "Hello, Margaret." M was very difficult, she remembers. My name, hello, Margaret. I worked on the M sound and he eventually rolled over to bubble it through the water. That M he worked on so hard. For Lovett, though, it often wasn't these formal speech lessons that were the most productive. It was just being together which taught her the most about what made Peter tick. When we had nothing to do was when we did the most, she reflects. He was very, very interested in my anatomy. If I was sitting here and my legs were in the water, he would come up and look at the back of my knee for a long time. He wanted to know how that thing worked, and I was so charmed by it. Okay, let's see. Peter liked to be with me, explains Lovett. He would rub himself on my knee, or my foot, or my hand. And at first I would put him downstairs with the girls, she said. But transporting Peter downstairs proved so disruptive to the lessons that, faced with frequent arousals, it seemed easier for Lovett to relieve his urges herself manually. I allowed that, she says. I wasn't uncomfortable with it as long as it wasn't rough. It would just become part of what was going on, like an itch. Just get rid of it. Scratch it and move on. And that's how it seemed to work out. It wasn't private. People could observe it. Now, this continues to go on for quite a while yet. Like I said, it's quite a deep investigative piece, if you can call it that, we've got here. But the moral of the story is the U.S. government spends your money paying people to give dolphins hand jobs with the hope that that will enable them to learn English.
Jesus Christ. Oh, it led into that one, but good God. Oh, God, you can't get much more surreal than that, can you?
Well, it can get more surreal because if you read the rest of the article yourselves, you'll see that eventually it gets to the point where they're giving dolphins acid in hopes that that will also help them develop the parts of their brain to speak English. And when that still doesn't work, they start taking acid with the dolphins.
Oh, good Lord. I mean, don't get me wrong, dolphins are an intelligent species. This may have helped, some of the study may have helped identify that. I don't think it really got very far for good reason. They don't have fucking vocal cords. Well, it's very difficult for them to make those noises without lips as well.
You can't let silly things like that stop the government from spending our money on it.
Well, and it does sound a whole lot like maybe The Shape of Water was written because of this.
Yeah, I hadn't even considered that, but it's the right time period for that movie's setting and everything, so.
I'm going to look into that. I'm going to see if that's the case, because it does seem like it. And that would explain where they got the idea for that movie when that movie was, considered strange.
Right. Well, we
No,
all
that's
know
true.
that the truth is stranger than fiction, right?
Usually.
Mm.
But yeah, I
All
mean,
right.
I don't even know really where to go with that, to be quite frank. It's surreal in the extreme, to say the least.
Yeah. I don't think there's anything too much more to say about it other than just what on earth? And then to
Well, if
accept
it's
it
a
and move on.
consolation, like if it's a consolation, the U.S. government does do a bunch of animal husbandry projects, and most of those involve some manner of manually arousing and jerking off an animal.
Hmm.
So, I mean, because you got to get the semen somehow.
You're right. That's not uncommon in husbandry projects, but that's also not what this was.
Yeah, yeah.
Like this
Yeah.
lady just decided to take it of her own initiative to start jerking off this dolphin several times a day. It sounded like.
Good Lord have mercy.
Yeah,
Oh,
apparently there was, at least according to what Wikipedia did not include, which I'm assuming they would have included something about this if it was a thing. They didn't include anything about her, Lily. So it
yeah.
was apparently just about the creature from the Black Lagoon. Like maybe if we sympathized more with it, we would understand that it wasn't the bad guy in the movie or whatever. Yeah, okay, well, I mean, whatever, I guess it happened. The real life shape of water.
Yeah.
Only maybe she didn't get aroused? I don't know. That's weird.
Yeah, that part of it was a little bit unclear from the article. It doesn't sound like it. It portrayed it anyways as it just being a chore for her, but I can't imagine that you keep doing it continuously unless you like it at least a little bit. That's speculation, though.
But Ben says this should end innocently. Be me, trained dolphin. Dolphin stares at my knee. He wants a hand job. Yeah, that's it. It is pretty much. It is pretty much a fucking weird conclusion to reach. Fungus. Oh, okay, so Fungus was saying that in chat. I thought they got the Shape of Water character from the Hellboy character. They were both Guillermo. Well, and Guillermo insists that they're not the same character, but there are tons of fan theories out there that state like how it definitely could be that. Ben says, I mean, it's not like the dolphin asked for a hand job. She had the idea. Yeah. Well, anyway,
True.
bad morning to everybody in the chat who's already said it, and anybody who's stuck around through the bestiality morning news so that they can get this information. Yeah, it's good to remember that a lot of these government programs act without much oversight from those who fund them, and so they can get away with doing things like this. Like, that's what I didn't like about Neil Tyson's appearance on Joe Rogan. First off, he's a cunt. Second off, the reason he was a cunt in this particular instance, unlike all the other instances where Neil deGrasse Tyson is a cunt, is because he told Joe Rogan flat out that private funding doesn't work, that it doesn't produce results. And he's theoretically a physicist, right? He's theoretically a scientist. He's theoretically somebody who fucking is supposed to look into these things on a more cerebral level. And he didn't look into at all whether or not they should be funded by an unaccountable institution capable of throwing unlimited funding at something. He just said that that's good and left it at that. You know?
Yeah,
well, also
unfortunately,
ignoring
it's
hundreds
not.
and thousands of years of the patronage system, which
Yeah.
seemed to also work just fine for science. But
Well, to be honest, as well, on top of that, the incentives when you deal with the public side go very much askew, especially on any topic that has a political association with it. Take, again, things like climate change and whatnot. It politicizes science to discuss whether or not mankind is directly affecting the planet
Well,
because
it
people
can.
agree and disagree.
I mean, as long as you have public funding, it can. But
Mm.
like the idea of like anthropogenic climate change can be depoliticized as long as politics gets out of the business of studying it. And to like we're anarchists here. It should get out of the business of funding everything, and
Mm.
the private and communal sectors and things similar to that should get into that. But for now, it's like, and that's why I'm saying this. I can see what you're saying. For now, it's politicized. It's not like it's immediately politicized once you start talking about how humans could have an impact. Not studying that would be ascientific.
No, that's fair enough. I'd say that's an accurate representation. However, the one thing one needs to remember is things that get funded get studied.
Yep.
So the more funding a government throws at something, the more it gets studied, but that doesn't necessarily mean all the studies that get put forward are of any value.
Well, right, like this one, dolphin jerk-off sessions. But, like, what I'm suggesting is that once you get the government out of funding this sort of thing, and the agencies which do fund it are accountable to it suddenly, and they're like interested in their bottom line being met, I think that we would see a much different application of those funds than we see now. So, I mean, I think that it's politicized in its current state, but I don't think that the nature of the science is what politicizes it. I think the nature of the funding is what politicizes it, where the funding comes from.
Yeah, I mean, we've already said it. The incentives matter, right? And I think that's what a lot of that boils down to.
And so does accountability, because the Federal Reserve can just quantitatively ease any government policies right deep into our colon. They don't need us to like know the value of an experiment. It's government funding. Just go apply for your grant, get it. Go apply for your loan or your scholarship, get it. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter at all what you're studying. This is also why the university system is such trash now, because essentially there's such this mad scramble for funding on an individual level that people will basically consider it their job to be a student. There's even a term for it called professional student. And when you end up with that job as a professional student, you're going to do whatever it takes to get scholarships X, Y, and Z. And what do you know? A lot of those scholarships, and you're going to start to feel entitled too, which was part of the point I was making, but I didn't quite get that building block in. But you're going to start to think of it as a job. You're going to start to think of it as you earned it. And when you start to think of it as a job that you earned, there's the secondary part of it where you'll start to think that what you're learning is valuable, and you'll start to adopt these sorts of mentalities. And when you start to get these scholarships for essentially being a certain demographic, for saying something that an institution wants published in their journal in a way that they want it published, it becomes essentially paid philosophy for a specific bent, a specific school or set of schools, and a specific particular mentality. And you can get paid essentially for being an ideologically driven pedant. And so many people do. And that's why the university system sucks. And then you translate that university system suckage to all of the systems that are theoretically supposed to be founded by the best and brightest. And they're funded by these same institutions, like government institutions. And you end up with people demanding things like equal pay for unequal work. You end up with people demanding that their work be representative, even though maybe this one dude is very, very good at what he does and he's studied it more and better than you have. You still want equal everything to him because male, female, not because of, fucking merit and skill. And basically what I mean to say is like that's a parallel to this, because this woman didn't have to go to a like personally accountable board of people and say, "Hey, I'm gonna go jerk off Philip," I think his name was.
Peter, yeah. But no,
Peter,
she just literally showed up at a government lab and got a job. Yeah.
Yeah, she just did it. She wasn't interested in getting approval. She wasn't interested in oversight. The only thing she wanted to do was spend the entire night documenting dolphins, and as part of that, she got to jerk them off repeatedly. And in doing so, in becoming essentially a government prostitute in a very specific and targeted way, she proves that government institutions aren't very accountable. Because I can guarantee you that any other institution where a woman came up from a project of essentially trying to cross-communicate cross-species, and said, "I want to include sex as part of that," most people would probably just laugh her out of the boardroom, and the few people that would probably have accepted too many projects like hers to take another project like that on, because there would be very little funding going to an institution that did that sort of thing. So, and that's just funding on that level. If it was a co-op and she was like, "Hey, I'm going to go randomly jerk off this dolphin," they would probably vote her out of the co-op entirely. So
you'd hope so, anyways.
Yeah, I mean,
well, it's most likely.
Let's be fair, though. It's not like this is a particularly gross example of waste for government. I'm sure this didn't cost the U.S. government that much money compared to, say, the 20 trillion lost by the DoD.
Well, yeah, and that's what I was going to say. Like, the global war on terror has much more awfulness involved with it. And in terms of that, like the ramping up of the police, I'm not saying that this is emblematic of it. What I am saying, though, is that this can be used as an example of how government waste operates. And I think that if this woman was accountable, that we would have seen something much, much different.
And just one last note, I think the surrealism should carry some impact too. It's not the most awful or the most expensive government waste, obviously not. But how many more absurd examples of government waste do you find? Like, this is something that could just offend anyone on the street,
True. Mm-hmm. And to be fair, though, I mean, I know that there's a lot of government grants that go on in colleges for some very, very stupid studies.
Oh, great. I mean, okay. And let's get into that. Gregory Spillane says that the government did research into mallard circumcision.
See, that's the kind of shit I'm talking about.
I'm gonna look this up while this particular element of this conversation fucking subsides.
All right, while you look that up, while you look up mallards being circumcised, I'm going to quickly highlight some stuff going on in the world. East Asia in particular. Apparently it's under some severe flooding at the moment. There've been quite a few...
Looks like it was a joke, by the way, because I can't see anything.
Well, while I'm on it, summer rains in Japan and the Koreas have been significant and haven't yet ceased. Typhoons and stalled fronts in Japan and on the Korean peninsula this summer have brought unprecedented rainfall and flooding from Gifu Prefecture down to Hiroshima. The typhoon season hasn't ended, and the remnants of Rumbia and a declining typhoon Sulik went through the Korean peninsula less than a week ago. The current threat to East Asia is from a near-stationary rain band that stretches from the Yellow Sea across South Korea to central Honshu. Japan's meteorological agency has issued warnings of heavy rain that could lead to landslides and floods in Niigata and Ishikawa prefectures on Japan's biggest island of Honshu. Over the last 2 days, the system has dropped 24.5 centimeters of rain over the city of Daejeon in South Korea, bringing widespread flooding. On the east coast of Honshu, Onohama recorded more than 100 mil of rain in under 6 hours. This slow-moving rain band is destined to bring up to another quarter meter more worth of rain to North Korea, parts of South Korea, and northern Honshu. Tropical storm Jebi, meanwhile, may hit the region in early September. So yeah, it looks like Asia's going to be a bit wet if you've got any plans to be flying to Japan or Korea anytime soon. You might want to stay on the northern sections rather than the southern side because you're probably going to have a very, very rainy time otherwise.
Definitely. Apparently, okay, so he's trying to send us a link. Maybe there is something to this.
Okay.
I'm gonna hit never generate new link, and he's gonna be able to send it to us in Discord. There. Oh, and while I'm linking to things, if you decide you want to support us, the monthly costs of this are going to be split between us and basically anybody else who decides to host, given the amount of days that they actually hosted. But effectively, this is our Patreon, and you can donate to that if you would like.
Yeah, we've got the New York Post article in question here in Discord. I'll open it right now. Is this something we want to get into, or do we want to save this one for last?
Yeah, no, I mean...
No, get into it. Get into it. There's no reason not to.
Yeah, right. Let me give this a quick read over, because I want this I do want this subject to be only part of the show. New York Post: government's wasteful spending includes $385,000 duck penis study. Duck, okay. So it's just generally duck dicks, okay. Taxpayers also got stuck with the bills for $10 million for National Guard advertising tie-ins with the Soldier of Steel movie, despite budget cuts reducing the Guard's strength by 8,000 soldiers. $7 billion for the Pentagon to destroy vehicles and other military equipment used in wars in the Middle East rather than sell or ship the items home. $17.5 million for special tax exemptions for Nevada brothels, including tax deductions for groceries. Wages for prostitutes, rent, and utilities. Nearly $1 million since 2010 for the National Endowment of Humanity's Popular Romance Project, which studies romance novels, films, comics, and internet fan fiction. $630,000 spent by the State Department to buy followers on its Facebook and Twitter accounts. Well, that's not surprising. They've fucking bots supporting the government. They need to fucking do that instead of get legitimate support, because they fucking can't. 320 veneer of democracy. There you go. $325,525 for a National Institutes of Health study that found wives could be happier if they could calm down faster during arguments with their husbands. $150,000 to support the Puppets Take Long Island Festival in Sag Harbor. So it's all that, and apparently it's just duck penis studies. I'm not exactly sure where circumcision fits into it, but I mean, they were clearly in deep and firm admiration of the fucking duck cock. So
I'm actually reading an article now from Slate, from the guy who did the duck genitalia study, basically lambasting Fox News readers for not understanding the point of science. Okay. So I'm not gonna read this whole thing. It's from Slate. It's by Patricia Brennan. And I'm assuming this is the person who studied duck penises. In the past few days, the internet has been filled with commentary on whether the National Science Foundation should have paid for my study on duck genitalia, and 88.7% of respondents to a Fox News online poll agreed that studying duck genitalia is wasteful government spending. The commentary supporting and decrying the study continues to grow. And this was about 5 years ago, by the way, that this happened. So I haven't heard much benefit that's come out from studying how ducks have corkscrew penises. But hey, as the lead investigator in this research, I would like to weigh in on the controversy and offer some insights into the process of research funding by the National Science Foundation. My research on bird genitalia was originally funded in 2005, so she'd been doing it for a good, 7 years during the Bush administration. Thus, federal support for this research cannot be connected exclusively to the sequestration or the Obama presidency, as many conservative websites have claimed. Yet, it doesn't matter. Government still funded you. Since Senator William Proxmire's Golden Fleece Awards in the 1970s and 80s, which seems a bit interesting name for it, basic science projects are periodically singled out by people with political agendas to highlight how government wastes taxpayer money on seemingly foolish research. These arguments misrepresent the distinction between the roles of basic and applied science. Basic science is not aimed at solving an immediate practical problem. Basic science is an integral part of the scientific process, but individual projects may sound meaningless when taken out of context. So she tries to use Gexskin, which is an adhesive product, a piece of applied science done out of gecko locomotion in basic science. Investment, I'm skipping ahead a bit. Investment in the NSF is just over $20 per year per person, while it takes upwards of $2,000 per year per person to fund the military. Basic research has to be funded by the government rather than private investors because there's no immediate profits to be derived from it. That's what R&D is for, you silly woman.
Well, also that goes back to what Neil Tyson was saying, which fucking cunt, because it doesn't address how the money gets there. It just says, this is where it is. Let's go there. And, you know, in doing so, they ignore the QE, they ignore the Fed, they ignore all of these things. And that's primarily, by the way, and I'm sure I could draw like 40,000 links, or maybe even just start writing my 5th book about it. I'm writing several books right now, and, you know, every time a new subject pops up, I think, hey, that'd make an interesting other one, and that's why I haven't finished one yet.
I mean, there are loads of philanthropy funds out there. I mean, there have been since the 1800s.
Here's the thing. This is the reason so many people are called conspiracy theorists, as though that's a bad thing. Because questioning the system means that you're a fundamental threat to a lot of people who, without the system, might not have a job. And they can...
Mate. Sorry. Your audio has just gone completely crazy, my side. I don't quite know what's going on.
Well, if I can take up the mantle, I'd just like to say that conspiracy theory is, yes, good actually, and that if you aren't looking into crazy offbeat topics, you're missing where all the real shit is happening every single day.
Yeah. All right, so is this any better in terms of audio?
No, it's, if anything, exactly the same.
Fucking okay. That's interesting on its own. Let me see what I can do about that.
Okay.
In the meantime, we want to move ahead with the other articles we've got here.
Yeah, let's skip. I mean, that duck article does eventually go on to try to defend the duck study.
Well, in what way?
To be honest, well, by saying that it discovered stuff about the morphology about female ducks in the process, because apparently ducks have corkscrew penises and females have spiraling vaginas to fit them. And apparently they found that the competition amongst males is a driving force behind the male traits and can be harmful to females. So basically, it sounds like they're trying to prove that toxic masculinity exists in nature. That's about the only thing I can take away from this study, is that it looks like they're trying to prove that because of duck penises, they're far more aggressive than most birds. So
just real quick before we get in, like, is my audio still bad?
Unfortunately, it's still crackly, mate. I don't quite know what the hell's going on with it.
All right. Well, keep going. I'll see if I can get my audio fixed, and then I'll see if I can repeat what I was about to say.
All right. Well, I'm going to skip to a different article then, because I'll be honest, I can't read about duck penises and vaginas anymore. It's just too surreal for a morning news show. So let's go for something that's a bit more family-friendly. Archbishop accuses Pope of sex abuse cover-up, reportedly flees country citing threats to his life, from Free Thought Project. The archbishop who exposed the Pope for allegedly covering up sex abuse in the church has reportedly gone into hiding, noting that he fears his life is in danger. As the Free Thought Project reported earlier this week, a former Vatican diplomat released a historical 11-page testament accusing the Catholic Church up to and including the Pope of not only failing to act on the child abuse scandal, but also being complicit in covering it up. Archbishop Carlo Maria Vigano, wrote in a letter that Pope Francis knew the allegations for years and did nothing to stop it. Now it has been reported that Vigano has been forced into, quote, hiding because he is in fear of his life. As TFTP reported, Vigano released the bombshell report accusing the Pope of covering up the allegations and asked for his resignation. Pope Francis has repeatedly asked for total transparency in the church. He must honestly state whether when he first learned about the crimes committed by McCarrick, who abused his authority with seminarians and priests. In any case, the Pope learned about it from me on June 23rd, 2013, and continued to cover him, Vigano wrote. Now, these statements appear to have gotten the retired archbishop in a world of hurt, and the high-level Catholic Church officials may want to silence him. This week, Italian blogger Aldo Maria Valli said that the archbishop told him that he purchased an airplane ticket and that he would never see him again. He will leave the country. He cannot tell me where he is going. I am not to look for him. His own mobile phone number will not work. We say goodbye for the last time, Valli said, of what the archbishop told him. Valli's claims were also backed up in a report for EWTN, in which Catholic journalist Edward Penton confirmed it, saying Vigano fears for his safety and his life is in danger. Also, quote, also what is being discussed is the safety of Archbishop Vigano. Penton reported on Monday he fears that he's coming forth with these allegations that his life is actually in danger. As 1 Peter 5 noted in a report, a former apostolic nuncio, widely respected for his professionalism and decency, forced to go into hiding at age 78 for simply telling the truth about his fellow apostolic successors. There is perhaps more wisdom in this than appears to be at first glance. Vigano's colleague, Monsignor Jean-Francois Lanthemu, whose job it was to inform Cardinal McCarrick of the news that Pope Benedict the 16th had levied sanctions against him because of his abuses, said earlier this week after confirming the veracity of the Vigano report, these may be the last lines I write. If I am found chopped up by a chainsaw and my body sunk in concrete, the police and hacks will say that we have to consider the hypothesis of suicide. This goes on for a little bit more. But yeah, basically, the priests are accused of working together in a predatory ring that was ongoing for years, in which they, quote, manufactured child pornography, shared intelligence on victims, and gave large gold crosses to certain boys to mock them as already being groomed for abuse, according to a report from Penn Live. The abuse had been ongoing for decades, victims have been warning us, and no one has been listening until now. If Archbishop Vigano happens to commit, quote, suicide by shooting himself in the back of the head twice, we may come to find out why it took decades for this disgusting ring of predators to be exposed. So, yeah, Catholic Church has got some serious explaining to do yet again. We've got Chile, we've got McCarrick, we've got, oh God, I don't even know where to stop with these people, it seems. Every single time they turn over a new rock, there's a priest molesting some kids. It's getting a bit...
I don't want to use the word systemic, but it's starting to feel like it might be appropriate at this point.
I mean, before now, it was just sort of like an ongoing SNL / Comedy Central style gag. And it was something that people sort of went, oh, yeah, we know that a few priests did this, but it wasn't all of them. Now I have to wonder if it's the other way around.
If we can be real for a second, those things get made into jokes on those comedy shows as a way to try and normalize it and to stop people from getting worked up about it. You know, those comedy shows are propaganda rings themselves.
Some of them are, I would agree, but I'm not certain all of them are. I mean, sometimes this type of activity needs highlighting, and to be quite frank, sometimes the best way to highlight something is to highlight the ironic insanity of it. I mean, for example, when it comes to things like the Meacham saga and Free Dankula, it's the same concept. You have to highlight just how stupid it is to call making fun of Nazis anti-Semitic. It's that kind of laughability, that absurdity that sometimes gets people to think, huh, I laugh at that, but it's actually true. Maybe I should do something about it, kind of thing. It does work. It has worked in the past. It's a really odd thing. I don't quite understand how it works, but a lot of people make fun of it, and I don't think all comedians who have dark senses of humor are part of some sort of mass conspiracy to normalize pedophilia.
Well, of course they don't need to be. For his hypothesis, they just need to contribute to it. They don't need to necessarily like have a stake in it being contributed to. So just saying that for that particular point. I mean, there are people in every conspiracy that that directly benefit, that directly built the conspiracy, and then there are people who are their unwitting accomplices. So, and
Your
this
audio
is
is fine, by the way.
okay, and I was gonna ask that because I closed a bunch of things that were impacting network performance according to task managers. So, but okay. So, and that's actually what I was gonna say before is that like it sort of ties in nicely to this. Sort of everybody, involved in a conspiracy, in this sort of sense, would not want people looking into one or more elements of their corruptly funded system. So if you start to look into government funding for things like duck penis study and jerking off dolphins, among other things, to get them to talk, then you eventually end up realizing how it connects to a shit ton of other things. And so once you join the cabal, you're cabalized. And you have incentive to prevent people from looking into how things really work, because if they do, you might lose your job. And so a lot of people have sort of maligned the word conspiracy and maligned the idea of a conspiracy theorist because their job relies on people being neither conspiracy investigators nor conspiracy theorists, and because in doing so, you might uncover the kinds of things that could lose them their job. And it's a similar case here where the people involved here in these abuse rings generally don't want you to look into any aspect of it too deeply. So if you can just laugh it off as shallow humor because you weren't one of the victims, then it does strike me as possible that's at least an unwitting accomplice in the acts that occurred. So it's sort of like I don't mean to say like silence is violence, because I don't really necessarily agree with that, but at the same time, it does lend itself to some credible positions in that regard.
I mean, for me, the fact remains, things are starting to come out about it because people are actually speaking out about it. There is public pressure for it to happen. And there are people who appear to be actively bringing down these entities, be they whistleblowers within the Catholic Church or certain groups within the FBI are actually closing the rings, some of which that they helped keep open to try and entrap as many people as they could. Supposedly, personally, I think they may have kept them open for other reasons, but that delves into a whole set of conspiracies that would probably take up the remaining 10 minutes that we have left. So I think we'll hold off on those. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely pressure at the moment to deal with this shit. And I don't think it's just US pressure. I think there's a lot of people that are just sick to death of the idea, even that this could be plausible. And the fact that it's still going on disgusts them.
Well, and the Pope wants to bury it. So he's gonna throw as many people under the bus as possible. And that's what I'm saying about the whole drain the swamp thing. any part of the swamp that Trump drains is only being drained because people are being thrown under the bus as part of a sort of house cleaning. It doesn't mean that it's cleaning up for the benefit of the people. It means that it's cleaning up so that the system can run more smoothly.
There's a good potential for that, I have to admit. Shall we hit some comments, guys, as we've only got 10 minutes left?
I think that's a good idea.
Well, yes, we should. But before we do,
Okay.
mind going over the e-privacy article that you had? Because I think
Oh,
that people
yeah.
should know about that.
Okay, fair enough. So this is from my old neck of the woods, marketing and advertising. And this is from CMS Wire. Staring down the intersection of e-privacy, GDPR, and Privacy Shield. Given the scope and complexity of GDPR, it can be difficult to imagine that there are elements of privacy and data sharing that the regulation didn't address. But yes, that seems to be the case. The European Union is updating its e-privacy directive with a possible implementation date for 2019. And the regulation will usher in a new set of rules for marketers and communications providers. Oh, Jesus. While GDPR is fresh in everyone's minds and still creating new forms of hell, it's helpful to explain how e-privacy, or EPR, as it's called, will intersect with that mammoth regulation, as well as a third additional related regulation, the Privacy Shield. That is a legal framework struck among the US, EU, and Switzerland to provide companies with a mechanism to comply with data protection requirements when transferring personal data from European Union and Switzerland to the US. One way to think about the intersection of e-privacy and GDPR, said David Matthewman, Data Protection Officer and Head of Production at Bliss, is to start with the current e-privacy directive, which requires consent for cookies and device IDs. The new regulation will likely change how that consent is gathered and which areas consent is needed for. So e-privacy will dictate which items of personal information you require for consent for, as opposed to, say, using the legitimate interest standard under GDPR, which lays out specific circumstances in which personal data is to be processed, such as changing the consent for cookies and device IDs from an opt-out to an opt-in. In short, e-privacy and GDPR regulations are complementary to each other, said Pravin Kothari, CEO of CipherCloud. He explained that GDPR regulates quite extensively the protection of personal and sensitive data and was derived in part from the EU Charter of Human Rights Article 8, which describes the protection of personal data. Article 8 speaks to consent, access to data, protection of data, and compliance by an independent authority. I'm going to skip a little bit ahead. Privacy Shield, which replaces an earlier regulation called Safe Harbor, went into effect July 2016 and details requirements for data protection when data on EU citizens is exported to the United States or vice versa. Using Privacy Shield, US companies can self-certify compliance to GDPR, Kothari said. Privacy Shield was authorized under the GDPR by language that allows the EU Commission to determine if a third country has adequate safeguards to manage and protect the personal and sensitive data of EU residents. If so, the data can be transferred between the EU and US-based companies. The key is to note that Privacy Shield only addresses one portion of GDPR. Companies that are self-certified under Privacy Shield may still have additional requirements to fulfill to be GDPR compliant. And this is why, everybody, I'm going to end it here because there's not that much more into this, and it's quite tying into all the various companies that are sort of trying to help certification processes. But this is part of the reason why so many companies are not actually serving content here in Europe from the US anymore. I can't get about half a dozen of the links that get put through here because I physically am blocked by the provider through GDPR. There'll be a little blurb saying their legal teams are trying to deal with the EU on this to come up with a resolution, but it's this part of the law that they basically have balked on, the bit that's not covered by Privacy Shield or the Safe Harbor Acts.
Have you written anything for Steemit about this?
I've written some defenses of the online advertising industry to try and explain to people that the algorithms that are used are a lot dumber than they think.
Well, specifically GDPR and how websites look.
Not on Steemit. I think I've written a few pieces on how it was going to go horrifically wrong um, as soon as it got released.
Well,
And
definitely consider writing something on that, because if people could see
oh,
from outside the EU, could see screenshots of the way websites can look if they can't get the proper representation in terms of this legislation, I think that that might give people sort of a face to the ideas of why this shouldn't be a thing to begin with.
I'm gonna have to do a whole video on that, mate. I wrote up a huge piece on GDPR on Google Plus back in the day, but it was, and when I say back in the day, I mean a few months ago.
Yeah.
But it was, I mean, it was quite long-winded. It predicted pretty much everything that has happened, which is everybody's privacy settings will be changed. Loads of people will complain. The memes will be brilliant. And there will be websites that just say, fuck this noise, and basically refuse to serve Europe with anything.
Right.
And so far, everything has come true. The only thing that hasn't come true yet, and that's only because I don't think the laws had enough of a time to really cause true pain for any companies, is actually sink huge volumes of small businesses in those markets.
Right.
The markets are still quite strong. If anything, this has created so much additional complexity that an entire new market around GDPR compliance will evolve just for Europe. And
Yeah.
I would
Moles.
not be surprised by that in the slightest. But this is going to just get even worse and worse and worse. And people who follow these rules and work out ways of helping other people to comply will make shit tons of money. And I know that because this is why Quantcast and one of my old companies as well, who I won't name just because I don't want to associate them in any way with this, but there are a number of companies out there that are providing that as a service right now. And you'll see them, you'll see those boxes, and they'll have loads of associated companies with them. If I'm honest, you probably should just turn them all off
Mm-hmm.
at this point. They're all tracking you, and it's all for monetary
Or
gain, but some of the bigger ones will probably be able to sell your data onto the state.
just use Brave.
Or just use
Yeah.
Brave. It does really work for that kind of crap. It really does cut down on any of the pop-ups and shit ads that you will get on some sites, and it absolutely kills any display advertising.
And it, it also tracks the number of things it's blocked. In fact, I'll sign up Bad Morning News for Brave today. I actually should have already done that already, but whatever. The only comment here that we could really reply to comes from Finian. He says, it's like agorism in general. Do as much as you're willing to voluntarily do. Each person picks their level of danger to themselves and their loved ones. Actions have consequences. Inactions do too. Yeah, well, and I wasn't saying that it doesn't have like consequences. What I'm saying is that those consequences aren't inherently violence just because they're there. The consequences themselves aren't what's violent. What's violent is the state and their terrific fucking enforcement of their monopoly across the globe. That's the violence. What's violent is the things that are done as a result of those consequences. Sort of the consequences. So those are what need to be opposed, and the more people look into that, the better prepared they will be to defend themselves from it. That's what I can say about that. Oh, he says, I was thinking of the guy that had to flee from death threats. Oh, well, okay, yeah, definitely. And he's right to flee too, because the Vatican is a country. It's not exactly like they can't just send some people after him. Countries and governments are corrupt by their very nature. So this is probably going to end very poorly for him if he doesn't get high profile enough.
True. Yeah, I don't have any doubt it'll go that way.
Yeah. He says, like me being a PI, I make lots of enemies. Haha. Yeah. Yeah.
No, that's a very real thing too.
But anyway, it's about 12 here. Well, not here, but
It's just
on
gone.
the East
It's
Coast.
just gone 5 my time.
Cool. Well, bad morning to everybody. Check us out on Steemit. Consider subbing to us on Patreon, and generally have a bad morning and a bad rest of your day.
Have a bad morning.
We'll see ya.